In Iraq, a broad-based government has been formed to replace the regime of Nouri al-Maliki, raising questions about what the next phase of action is going to be against Islamic State militants. Joining me is Chris Oates of Oxford Analytica to discuss the issue. Chris, how does this change things in terms of potential US action against Islamic State militants? The White House has certainly welcomed it, hasn't it?
It has, and I think it's made it easier for the White House to argue in favor of more intervention. One of the reasons why they held back when the Islamic State first started taking over towns was the thought that this wasn't an external, was not a global threat. It was a response to the situation within Iraq, specifically towards Nouri al-Maliki monopolizing power and excluding the Sunnis. So now that Baghdad has a broader coalition where you might expect that the Sunnis have a more realistic chance of being integrated into the government, the White House can say if military action against the Islamic State goes forward, there's a greater chance at a political settlement, which can then lock down the gains.
The other thing which the US clearly would like to do, and President Obama's talked about, is getting more support from countries in the region, countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and so on, to take part in any kind of military intervention. How is that going?
Well, most of that work was done by the Islamic State. It's one of the few actors in the region which seems to have unified everyone. The moderate rebels in Syria, the Assad regime, Iran, Saudi Arabia, US officials were talking with Jordan and Lebanon recently. So it does seem as if there is certainly diplomatic support for greater action against the Islamic State. What the question is whether there will be any practical support. And I don't think there will be much, and I also don't think it would actually be necessary. The gains that the Islamic State have made can really only be reversed by ground troops. And unless Saudi Arabia and the UAE feel like invading Iraq, that's very unlikely that they'll provide those ground troops. So those troops will come from Iraq and the rebels in Syria and the Kurdish forces in Iraqi Kurdistan. So while there may be a diplomatic coalition of the willing, I don't think the coalition of the willing will actually matter that much.
Can you give me an assessment of the situation on the ground and the need to take them on with airstrikes led by the US? I mean, where is Islamic State militants now? What are they doing? Where are they? And how pressing is the need to take them on?
So they're currently now northern and western Iraq and eastern Syria. They have been pushed out of some of the places they took. The initial gains towards Kurdistan, that was one of the key prompts for the U.S. to intervene with air support. Those have been driven back. They lost the Mosul Dam to Iraqi and Kurdish forces. But then again, they still have a lot of territory, and there aren't many forces that can go on the offensive against them. So the idea for airstrikes is to degrade the forces of the Islamic State, as Obama said, but mainly to contain them so that the rest of the actors in the region have a chance to intervene on the ground. So because of the territory, airstrikes will likely be able to prevent further expansion by the Islamic State. They may be able to prevent movement within Islamic State territories, because if there were large formations on the roads in the relatively open expanses of northern Iraq, the U.S. could hit them, but it won't be able to take any villages or towns from the Islamic State with drones and airstrikes. They are at best an auxiliary arm of the military operation.
Do you think the Obama administration is acting too slowly on this at the end of the day, or is it right to have waited for all these other pieces to come into play?
I think they acted in the most timely manner that seemed to fit with the U.S. national interests. When the Islamic State first started taking over towns, it appeared to be an internal Iraqi dispute and could only be dealt with by internal Iraqi forces. And that's what we have today with the new government, possibly getting towards that. They acted pretty swiftly when it appeared to be a humanitarian crisis on a mountain and when Erbil appeared to be threatened. So when there was an immediate crisis, they acted. And then once the Islamic State pulled back and were contained, it seems to me to be appropriate to take time to deliberate.
Chris Oates of Oxford Analytica, thank you.
Thank you.